Let's turn in our Bibles this morning to Daniel chapter 2. Fasten your seatbelts. We're about to have a crash course in Bible prophecy this morning. This is the first book we've reached so far in this series that I took it and broke it into a part 1 and a part 2. And that's because the book of Daniel very neatly divides into two sections. Dr. Graham Scroggie writes about half of Daniel is history, the other half is prophetic. The first half is narration, and the second half is revelation. Remember that Babylon invaded Judah on 3 separate occasions, and it was during the first phase of that invasion when Daniel and his friends were taken to Babylon, about 605 BC, when Daniel's believed to be about 20 years old, and while in Babylon, Daniel and his friends prosper. About halfway through chapter 1, verse 9, we read, God brought Daniel into the favor and goodwill of the chief of the eunuchs. And then in verse 17, later towards the end of chapter 1, we read, God gave Daniel and his friends knowledge and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. So that's going to become important to this morning's Bible study. So last week, we looked at the events surrounding Daniel and his friends in chapters 1 through 6, and this morning we're going to look at Daniel's prophetic writings. And this is one of those studies where I just acknowledge up front, I'm going to move really fast, okay? And so I just encourage everybody to listen, right? I encourage you to jot stuff down, go back home, listen to the study again, press pause, take time to look up the cross-references, and just invest into your study of the Bible. This is also one of those studies where I'm not going to cover absolutely everything that we could talk about. Just in the interest of time, I'm going to limit our study this morning to certain prophecies of Daniel. So there's no need to come up to me afterwards and say, well, we could have talked about this, or you didn't mention that. I know for the sake of being able to move our overall series forward, we're just going to talk about certain things this morning. And every single one of these prophecies that we're going to talk about today is worthy of a study unto itself. So again, we're going to put a lot into a single Bible study this morning. So let's start in chapter 2 when King Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And Daniel provides the interpretation for the dream. All the way down in verse 31 of chapter 2, Daniel says, You, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. In verse 32, he says, This image's head was of fine gold, its chest and arms were of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of clay and partly of iron. In verse 34, he says, You watched while a stone was cut out without hands, which struck this image on its feet, broke them in pieces, and then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed. The wind carried them away, and the stone that struck the image became a great mountain that filled the whole earth. Daniel says in verse 36, This is the dream. Now we will tell the interpretation of the dream. So Daniel says to King Nebuchadnezzar at the end of verse 38, straight up, You are the head of gold, which is extremely helpful, right? That provides us with the starting point. David Guzik writes, Nebuchadnezzar or Babylon is clearly said to be the head of gold in this image that Nebuchadnezzar dreams of. But, Daniel says in verse 39, After you shall arise another kingdom that's inferior to yours, then another, a third kingdom of bronze, and then a fourth kingdom as strong as iron. So this statue represents the dominating empires that the world has seen, starting with Babylon. After Babylon comes the Medo-Persian Empire, that's the silver section. Then comes the Greek Empire, that's the bronze section. And then after them, the Roman Empire, which is represented by iron. Iron, by the way, is the strongest of all of these materials. That's why Daniel says in verse 40, The fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom, that fourth kingdom, will break in pieces and crush all the others. One author writes, The legs of iron represent the Roman Empire, most unified and enduring of them all, Babylon stood for 66 years, Medo-Persia for 208 years, the Greek Empire for 185 years, the Roman Empire stood for more than 500 years. What's happening with my microphone? Well, would you look at that? I got another microphone. Turn this one off. I don't want to mess with those kinds of distractions. Okay, so we're on the fourth empire, right? Now we come to the legs, right? The legs of iron, they extend into the feet and the 10 toes. So it's a continuation of the fourth empire, right? Our legs, they're not our feet and toes. They're connected, right? My feet and my toes aren't the same thing as my legs, but they're a continuation of my legs. They're different but connected. So verse 41 says, whereas the feet and toes are partly of clay and partly of iron, there's going to be a kingdom that comes that's divided. And verse 42 says, as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly fragile. There will be an extension of this once strong fourth Roman Empire that will have similarities to the legs of iron, but not the same overall strength. The 10 toes of this statue are believed to represent 10 rulers or 10 leaders who will come on the scene in the last days as an extension of the Roman Empire. In verse 44, Daniel says, in the days of these kings. What kings? Well, the kings represented by the 10 toes of the statue. In the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. It shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms and stand forever. He says in verse 45, inasmuch as you saw that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. So Daniel is speaking of things that will come. This hasn't happened yet, what we're reading about in Daniel chapter 2. If we were reading this passage as only something historical, then we should have seen the fulfillment of God destroying all the earthly kingdoms of the earth and setting up his kingdom. But we haven't seen that yet. One author writes, the stone cut without hands shatters a confederation of kings represented by the feet of the image, and then God's kingdom will dominate the earth. Since Roman history provides no fulfillment of this federation of 10 kings, this prophecy must still be in the future. This passage describes a single decisive event, and since the church or the gospel have not, in a single decisive event, shattered the reign of human kingdoms, this event is still in the future. The stone cut without hands is Jesus, not the church. Therefore, the final superpower of the world is thought to be a revival of the Roman Empire, a continuation of the legs of iron. This will be the final world empire that the returning Jesus will conquer. The question is, do we see any kind of a revival of or an extension of the Roman Empire in the world today? I think we absolutely do. I'll leave it up to you to go read about the history of the European Union. It grew largely out of the Treaty of Rome in 1957 and the Club of Rome in 1968. One article states, Rome's historic prominence in the Mediterranean basin and Europe has been invoked by the European states that came after it, claiming succession to Roman authority and to legitimate their rule over lands throughout the former Roman Empire. In another article from 2002, we read Vladimir Putin may have created a new superpower, and it's not Russia. Since Putin invaded Ukraine, the European Union has changed. A recent New York Times opinion piece suggests the invasion has both united and militarized the EU. The EU governs more than 445 million people. That's more than the United States. The EU's gross domestic product exceeds 15 trillion, putting it second behind the United States. If the EU continues to assert itself on the world stage, it could soon wield superpower influence. The European Union could revive the complex, decentralized power of the Roman Empire. Pretty interesting. Now, with all of that in mind, let's jet over to Daniel chapter 7. And if you don't have time to look there, that's okay. I'm going to put the cross references for you on the big screen. You can look them up later. But in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel has another prophetic revelation, and though it's different, it speaks of the same thing. David Guzik writes, 40 years after Nebuchadnezzar's dream, Daniel has a vision describing the same succession of empires. Daniel saw it from God's perspective. Nebuchadnezzar saw it from man's perspective. Nebuchadnezzar saw these empires as an impressive image. Daniel sees them as fierce beasts. So in Daniel chapter 7, verse 3, Daniel sees 4 great beasts that come up out of the sea, each different from the other. And then in verse 4, he says, the first was like a lion, and it had eagle's wings. Verse 5, suddenly there was another beast, a second like a bear. In verse 6, Daniel says, there was another beast, like a leopard. And then in verse 7, Daniel says, after this I saw a fourth beast, dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, and trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. Okay, now right off the bat, we should notice several similarities between the beasts of Daniel chapter 7 and Nebuchadnezzar's image of Daniel chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar sees a single statue divided into 4 sections. Daniel has a vision of 4 beasts. In Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the 4 sections represent 4 kingdoms. Daniel 7:17 says the 4 beasts are 4 kings, which arise out of the earth. The 4th section of Nebuchadnezzar's image, the legs, are of iron, which break in pieces and shatter everything. The 4th beast of Daniel 7 has huge iron teeth, breaking and devouring in pieces. The 4th section of Nebuchadnezzar's image extends into feet with 10 toes. The 4th beast of Daniel 7 has 10 horns. Daniel 2:44 refers to the 10 toes as kings. Daniel 7:24 says the 10 horns are 10 kings. Gleason L. Archer writes, there is unmistakable correspondence between the horns of Daniel chapter 7 and the 10 toes of Daniel chapter 2. And the mention of iron in the teeth suggests the legs and toes of iron in that image. Now, what happens to the beasts of Daniel chapter 7? Because back in chapter 2, Daniel had seen a stone that was cut out without hands, which struck Nebuchadnezzar's image on its feet. Daniel says, the God of heaven sets up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It shall break in pieces and consume all these other kingdoms and stand forever. Well, Daniel says of the beasts in Daniel chapter 7 that these beasts have their dominion taken away. And behold, one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven, to him is given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed. So there is a shared outcome of the kingdoms represented by Nebuchadnezzar's image and the 4 dominating beasts of Daniel chapter 7. God's going to destroy them all and set up his kingdom. So, Nebuchadnezzar's dream and Daniel's vision of the 4 beasts are the same thing. Now, there is something different about Daniel chapter 7. Back in verse 8, Daniel describes the 4th beast. When he's describing the 4th beast, he says, as he's considering the horns, there was another horn, a little horn, that came up from among them. And in this horn, he says at the end of verse 8, there were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking pompous words. In verse 11, Daniel says, I watched because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking, till the beast was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame. He says in verse 19, I wished to know the truth about the fourth beast and the 10 horns that were on its head and the other horn which came up, which had the eyes and the mouth which spoke pompous words. In verse 21, Daniel says, this horn made war against the saints and prevailed against them. Verses 24 and 25 say, this little horn shall rise from the 10 horns which are 10 kings. He shall be different from the first ones, and shall speak pompous words against the Most High, and persecute the saints of the Most High. The saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. So what Daniel sees here is a figure that we often refer to as the Antichrist. Don't take your cues from Hollywood when it comes to knowing who or what the Antichrist is going to be, okay? Because if you do, you'll think it's going to be a fast-talking lawyer like Al Pacino from The Devil's Advocate. The specific term Antichrist appears 5 times in Scripture. John tells us there is a spirit of Antichrist at work in the world. He also says there will be many Antichrists, but this all leads up to one that the Bible refers to as the Antichrist, a final world leader who comes on the scene in the last days and who unites mankind in a final rebellion against God. There is no one passage that we turn to where we read a description of the Antichrist. What we do is we build a composite of him by looking at several passages. So for instance, in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul refers to him as the man of sin, or the son of perdition. He says, the coming of this lawless one is according to the working of Satan with all power, signs, and lying wonders. In Daniel, he's referred to as the king of fierce countenance. In Daniel chapter 8, he's called the prince that shall come and the one who makes desolate. In Daniel chapter 9, the willful king. In Daniel chapter 11, and this little horn who speaks pompous words. In Daniel chapter 7. Now, there is a companion passage to this one. You don't have to turn there, but I encourage you to look it up later. In Revelation chapter 13, listen to how John describes something very similar to what Daniel is describing here. In Revelation 13, John says, I stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and, 10 horns. That's interesting. And on his horns 10 crowns, and on his heads a blasphemous name. John says, the beast which I saw was like a leopard. His feet were like the feet of a bear. His mouth like the mouth of a lion. The dragon, who we know is Satan from Revelation 12:9, the dragon gave this beast his power, his throne, and great authority. And John says, all the world marveled and followed this beast, and he was given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. He opened his mouth to blaspheme God, and it was granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them for 42 months. So, Daniel sees 4 beasts rising up out of the sea. One's like a lion, one's like a bear, one's like a leopard, and a 4th beast with 10 horns, which are 10 kings. John sees a single beast rising up out of the sea with 10 horns. Revelation 17 says these are 10 kings. It's like a leopard, a bear, and a lion. Both describe a figure, an individual, with a mouth who speaks pompous words against the Most High. John says he's given a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies against God. Daniel says he makes war against the saints and prevails against them. John says it's granted to him to make war with the saints and to overcome them. John and Daniel are seeing the same thing. Now, there is another similarity between these 2 prophecies that's not as immediately apparent. Daniel says that the saints are going to be given into the hand of this little horn for a time, and half a time. For a time, times, and half a time. John says that he is given authority to continue for 42 months. These verses actually refer to the same period of time. It's the second half of what we call the Great Tribulation. Jesus talks about this in Matthew chapter 24. John speaks of it in Revelation 7:14. The idea is of a final 7-year period here on earth, which initially begins as a time of tremendous prosperity and peace under the leadership of the Antichrist, but turns into a time of persecution and judgment immediately before Jesus comes back and sets up his kingdom here on earth. Where do we get the idea of a final 7-year period? Well, it's actually found in the book of Daniel. In Daniel chapter 9, we have another somewhat famous passage of Scripture. It's referred to as Daniel's 70 weeks of years. In Daniel chapter 9, the angel Gabriel tells Daniel, 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city. So this is a prophecy that relates to the Jews. Those are Daniel's people. And for the city of Jerusalem, Daniel's holy city. Also, the idea of weeks in this passage is not literal. Okay, this is not referring to a 7-day period. In the Hebrew language, the term weeks refers to a unit of 7. So Bible commentator David Guzik points out there is almost universal agreement amongst Bible scholars that this passage refers to 70 sets of 7 years or weeks of years. So that would be, if we do the math, 490 years that are determined or set aside for dealing with or relating to the Jewish people and Jerusalem. In verse 25, Gabriel says, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. So 7 weeks or periods of 7 years plus 62 periods of 7 years. So a total of 69 periods of 7 years or 483 years. That will pass between the going forth of a command to rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince." Now, many people take the reference to "until Messiah the Prince" to refer to that one time in Scripture when Jesus actually arranged for himself to be presented as Messiah, the day of the triumphal entry, April 6th, 32 AD. Now, here's what's amazing. In 445 BC, King Artaxerxes issues a decree and he gives Nehemiah permission to rebuild Jerusalem. We read about that in Nehemiah chapter 2. If that's the starting point, we should be able to, according to this prophecy, count 483 years until the arrival of Messiah. And in his book, The Coming Prince, an apologist and preacher by the name of Sir Robert Anderson demonstrates how, if we use a 360-day calendar, because that's what the Jews used in Daniel's day, if you take 483 years times 360 days in a year, that's 173,880 days. And he shows how from the exact date of Artaxerxes' decree, March 14th, 445 BC, all the way up until the date of Jesus' triumphal entry, April 6, 32 AD, there is exactly 173,880 days. It's absolutely incredible. But here's the deal. That's only 483 years. We said there was 490 years. So that means there's 7 years left. Oh, wait a minute. Now we see where we're going with this. Daniel 9:26 says, after the 62 weeks, which remember is after the initial 7 weeks, so after 69 weeks of 7 years each, we read, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. That's the crucifixion. He was wounded for our transgressions. Daniel writes, the people of the prince who is to come, that's a reference to the Antichrist, shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. Then he, the prince who is to come, of verse 26, the Antichrist, he shall confirm a covenant with many for how long? 1 week. That's a period of 7 years. It's the remaining period of 7 years, the final week of Daniel's 70-week prophecy. Think of it this way. God has established a prophetic time clock with the nation of Israel. And he says, when you see a decree go forth to rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince, there's going to be 483 years. Now, once Messiah comes, God stops the clock. He presses the pause button. Why would that be? Because in the Jews' rejection of Jesus as their Messiah, the gospel has now come to us as the Gentiles. And Scripture says we're living in the time of the Gentiles. But Romans 11 says there's going to come a time when the fullness of the Gentiles comes in and God once again begins to deal specifically with the nation of Israel, and there will be 7 more years. And the restarting of that clock is signified when the Antichrist enters into a covenant with the nation of Israel for 1 week, one final period of 7 years on the earth. If you want to have your mind blown, several Islamic hadiths say that their coming Mahdi, which is their Messiah, will reign specifically for 7 years. It's pretty fascinating, but it's a separate study, so we won't go into that today. But here we read, in the middle of the week, the Antichrist brings an end to sacrifice and offering. This is referred to 6 times in the book of Daniel. It's called the abomination of desolation by Jesus in Matthew chapter 24, Mark chapter 13. Jesus points to it as the sign of the immediacy of his return. Daniel says the Antichrist will take away the daily sacrifices and place there the abomination of desolation. And what many people believe, myself included, is that the Antichrist will go into a rebuilt Jewish temple, which we know exists from the book of Revelation. Paul says in 2 Thessalonians 2 that he exalts himself above all that is called God, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. Now, why is the reference to the Antichrist bringing an end to sacrifice in the middle of the week significant? Because if 1 week is a period of 7 years, how much is half of 7? It's 3.5 years, right? How many months is 3.5 years? I'll tell you, it's 42 months. How many days is 42 months? If we use the 360-day calendar, it's 1,260 days. Revelation 11:2 says the holy city will be trampled underfoot for 42 months. Revelation 13:5 says the Antichrist is given authority to continue for 42 months. Revelation 11:3 says the 2 witnesses minister for 1,260 days. Revelation 12:6 says the Jews flee into the wilderness where they have a place prepared by them for God for 1,260 days. Daniel 12 says at that time, Michael shall stand up, the great prince who stands watch over the sons of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was since there was a nation. It's the great tribulation, Jesus says, such as has not been since the beginning of the world until this time. Daniel says it shall be for a time, times, and half a time. We saw that phrase earlier in Daniel chapter 7, verse 25, when the saints are given into the Antichrist's hand for a time, times, and half a time. If we break it down this way, a time is 1 year, times, plural, is 2 years, half a time, that's half a year, that's 3.5 years. The same time frame is 42 months, or 1,260 days. These all refer to the same thing. David Guzik writes, taking all of these together, we are obviously dealing with the last half of Daniel's 70th week, the Great Tribulation. Now, we've said before that when it comes to Bible prophecy, there's what we call a near-far aspect to it. And Daniel chapters 8 and 11 provide more details about the Antichrist. And many of these elements, listen, have been fulfilled. Past tense, specifically in the historical figure known as Antiochus Epiphanes. So here's a quick history lesson. Antiochus Epiphanes was one of the successors of Alexander the Great. He ruled the Seleucid dynasty, which was Syria and Israel. The Seleucid dynasty was a Western Greek state, or a Greek state in Western Asia. Antiochus ruled there from 175 to 164 BC. Now, Epiphanes is not a name. It's a title, like Christ. Christ is not a name. Christ is a title. It means anointed one. So Epiphanes is a title which Antiochus took to himself. It means illustrious one. And he commanded worship of himself. In fact, the coins of his day were inscribed with the phrase Theos Epiphanes, which means God manifest. One author writes, he was an accurate and dramatic fulfillment of Daniel's prophecy in history. He was also a notorious persecutor of the Jewish people. Some estimates say that he murdered more than 100,000 Jews, selling another 40,000 into slavery. He robbed the temple of about $1 billion by modern estimates. In 168 BC, Antiochus set up an image of Zeus in the Jewish temple, and he sacrificed a pig on the altar, thus causing the daily sacrifices to come to a stop because he had desecrated the altar. Greek historian Diodorus wrote, Antiochus sacrificed a great swine at the altar of God and sprinkled them with the blood of the sacrifice. He commanded that the books, which were used for instruction, should be sprinkled with broth made of swine's flesh. He put out the lamp, which burns continually in the temple, and then he forced the high priest and other Jews to eat swine's flesh. This resulted in what we refer to as the Maccabean revolt. You can read about it in the book of 1st and 2nd Maccabees in the Apocrypha. One author writes, scholars of Second Temple Judaism sometimes refer to Antiochus' reign as the Antiochene crisis. Listen to this description from Daniel chapter 8 of what was fulfilled in Antiochus and what will be fulfilled in the coming Antichrist. Daniel 8 says, a king shall arise, having fierce features, who understands sinister schemes. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. He shall destroy fearfully and shall prosper and thrive. He shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Through his cunning, he shall cause deceit to prosper under his rule, and he shall exalt himself in his heart. He shall destroy many in their prosperity. He shall even rise against the prince of princes, but he shall be broken without human means. Now, here's the interesting thing. Jesus speaks about the abomination of desolation that was written about by Daniel the prophet as though it's still future. He says, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. So I believe, as David Guzik writes, that Antiochus Epiphanes is an historical preview of the coming Antichrist. This is why so much space is given to describing the career of one evil man in Daniel. He prefigures the ultimate evil man. And I think this goes back to something that John tells us, that there will be many antichrists. We could say that Nimrod was a type of Antichrist. Hitler is a type of the Antichrist. Stalin is a type of the Antichrist. David Guzik writes, Antiochus was like a trailer released before the feature of the final Antichrist. All told, the book of Daniel provides much understanding when it comes to end times, the book of Revelation, an end times prophecy and the coming world leader known as the Antichrist. Now, to wrap things up, in Daniel chapter 12, Daniel is told to shut up the words and seal the book until the time of the end, when many shall run to and fro and knowledge shall increase. Which is interesting because that definitely describes the day and age in which we live. Daniel says, although I heard, I did not understand. And so he asks, my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And the answer comes, go your way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed till the time of the end. Go your way till the end, for you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. One author writes, Daniel's prophecies will be less mysterious at the time of the end. The incredible development in our understanding of biblical prophecy in the last 150 years should make us see that we are truly at the time of the end. So, as I say, there you have a quick crash course in Daniel's prophetic writings. Now, next week, we're going to shift gears, and we're going to look at really a story that is found in the book of Esther, which takes place during the time of the Persian Empire. Now, technically, the book of Esther happens a little bit later. It happens between Ezra chapter 6 and Ezra chapter 7. But since we're currently with Daniel in Persia, I think it makes sense for us to insert it here. So I encourage you this week to read the book of Esther. It's a fascinating story. It's a beautiful story. Come back next week, read up, prayed up, and then after Harvest Fair, we're going to look at the Jews finally returning to their land after the 70 years of captivity in Babylon. So that's where we're going to be next Sunday as Route 66 continues.